Grok dug through empires, wars, science, politics, and culture. But the reason it gave for Islam's endurance stunned researchers worldwide. Islam has lasted for more than 1,400 years, surviving empire collapses, colonial invasions, global wars, and massive cultural shifts. Historians usually explain this through political power, military expansion, and cultural influence. But when Grok AI, one of the most advanced reasoning models in the world, was asked to analyze why Islam endured for so long, its response took researchers by surprise. The AI pointed to deeper forces that continued across centuries, patterns humans often overlook. What Grok uncovered stunned scientists who studied religion, sociology, and civilizational history. Make sure to follow along, because the deeper we go into Grok's analysis, the more surprising the truth becomes. The foundation. Before we explore why Islam has lasted 1,400 years, we need to understand what that really means. When historians talk about Islam's survival, they're not just talking about a religion. They're discussing an entire civilization that began in the 7th century Arabia and spread across continents. The journey started around 610 CE when Prophet Muhammad received revelations in Mecca. Within just 23 years, a small community of followers transformed into a movement that would reshape world history. By 632 CE, when Muhammad died, Islam had united most of the Arabian Peninsula under a single faith and political structure. But here's what makes this story remarkable. Most religious movements that tied themselves closely to political power collapsed when that power faded. The Roman gods disappeared with Rome. Many ancient belief systems vanished when their empires fell. Yet Islam not only survived, but flourished even when its political structures fractured and changed repeatedly over 14 centuries. Historians like Bernard Lewis and Ira Lapidus have spent their careers studying this question. They point to something crucial that we'll explore throughout this video. Islam wasn't just a religion or just a political system. It created interconnected networks of trade, scholarship, law, and community that could survive even when individual caliphates and empires collapsed. The early Islamic community, called the Ummah, created something unique. They built systems that were both flexible enough to adapt to different cultures and strong enough to maintain core identity. This balance between adaptation and preservation became key to Islamic civilization's longevity. Think about it this way. Christianity took centuries to spread beyond the Mediterranean and faced severe persecution early on. Buddhism required hundreds of years to move from India across Asia. But Islam expanded from Spain to China within a single century after Muhammad's death, creating what historians call the fastest religious and cultural expansion in human history up to that point. The power of political organization. One of the first factors historians identify is the unique political structure Islam created from its very beginning. Unlike many religions that started as purely spiritual movements, Islam combined religious teaching with practical governance from day one. Muhammad wasn't just a prophet. He was also a statesman, military leader, and judge. When he moved from Mecca to Medina in 622 CE, an event called the Hijra, he created a complete political system with laws, treaties, and administrative structures. The Constitution of Medina, drafted in the early 620s, is one of the earliest written constitutions in human history. It established rights for Muslims, Jews, and Christians living in the city. It created a framework for resolving disputes and maintaining order. This wasn't theoretical philosophy. It was practical governance that actually worked. When the Rashidun Caliphate emerged after Muhammad's death, it inherited this tradition of combining spiritual authority with political power. The title caliph literally means successor, and these leaders weren't just religious figures. They were heads of state who commanded armies, collected taxes, and administered justice. This dual nature gave Islam something crucial for survival. When political structures were strong, they reinforced and spread the faith. When political structures weakened or collapsed, the religious and social aspects kept communities together until new political forms could emerge. Look at what happened after the Abbasid Caliphate fragmented in the 10th century. The central political authority in Baghdad lost control over distant provinces. Many empires would have collapsed entirely at this point. But Islam didn't depend solely on that central authority. The religion had embedded itself in local legal systems, educational institutions, and daily practices. Regional powers like the Seljuk Turks, the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt, and the Delhi Sultanates in India all established their own Islamic states. They might have been politically independent or even rivals, but they shared Islamic law, supported Islamic scholarship, and participated in the same broader Islamic civilization. Historian Albert Hourani noted that by the end of the 10th century, Islam had become more clearly defined with elaborate systems of ritual, doctrine, and law that were distinctly different from non-Muslim practices. This clarity helped Islamic political structures adapt to different regions while maintaining recognizable Islamic character. Trade networks that spanned continents. Here's something that often gets overlooked when people talk about religious survival. Economics matter tremendously. Islamic civilization created perhaps the most extensive trade network the world had ever seen up to that point. Muhammad himself had been a merchant before becoming a prophet. This wasn't coincidental to Islam's success. Religion, from its very beginning, understood commerce and actively encouraged it. Unlike some other religious traditions that viewed wealth with suspicion, Islam saw honest trade as honorable and blessed work. The early Muslim conquests didn't just spread a faith. They eliminated political boundaries between the Byzantine and Persian empires that had restricted trade for centuries. Suddenly, merchants could move from Spain to India, from North Africa to Central Asia, under a common legal framework. The Abbasid Caliphate, which ruled from 750 to 1258 CE, actively promoted this trade network. They established a unified monetary system using both gold dinars and silver dirhams. They made Arabic a common commercial language across vast territories. They abolished many transit tolls that had made long-distance trade expensive and risky. Baghdad, under the Abbasids, became possibly the largest city in the world, with estimates suggesting a population of over 1 million people. It sat at the crossroads of multiple trade routes. Merchants from China, India, Africa, and Europe all converged there, exchanging not just goods but ideas, technologies, and knowledge. The Islamic economic system had built-in advantages for longevity. Islamic law, called Sharia, included detailed commercial regulations. Qadis, or Islamic judges, could resolve business disputes according to consistent legal principles. Merchants had recourse to systematic justice, which made trade less risky and more predictable. Credit and banking flourished in the Islamic world centuries before they became common in Europe. Muslim merchants developed sophisticated financial instruments including checks, letters of credit, and partnership contracts. These tools facilitated trade across enormous distances and helped build wealth that sustained Islamic civilization. The Indian Ocean trade network became essentially an Islamic lake by the 9th century. Muslim merchants dominated trade routes connecting East Africa, Arabia, India, Southeast Asia, and China. Cities like Kilwa, Malacca, and Calicut became wealthy Islamic trading centers, spreading the faith through commercial contacts rather than conquest. In West Africa, trans-Saharan trade routes connected the Islamic Mediterranean world with wealthy kingdoms like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Gold, salt, and slaves moved north while manufactured goods, books, and Islamic scholarship moved south. This trade helped Islam spread peacefully across the Sahel and into sub-Saharan Africa. The Intellectual Revolution. If you want to understand why Islamic civilization lasted, you must understand its commitment to knowledge. The period from roughly the 8th to the 13th century is called the Islamic Golden Age for good reason. During these centuries, Muslim scholars made advances that shaped human civilization for centuries to come. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, established by Caliph al-Ma'mun in the early 9th century, became the intellectual center of the world. Scholars there translated works from Greek, Persian, Sanskrit, and Syriac into Arabic. They preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost forever, including works by Aristotle, Plato, Euclid, and Ptolemy. Islamic scholars created new fields of study. The word algebra comes from the Arabic al-Jabr. Al-Khwarizmi, a 9th century Persian mathematician, essentially invented this branch of mathematics. The word algorithm derives from the Latinized version of his name. Arabic numerals, which the entire modern world now uses, were actually Indian numerals that Muslim mathematicians adopted, refined, and spread westward. The concept of zero as a number, crucial for modern mathematics and computing, came to Europe through Islamic scholarship. In medicine, figures like Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, wrote comprehensive medical texts that were used in European universities for over 600 years. His Canon of Medicine, completed in 1025 CE, was one of the most influential medical texts ever written. It systematically organized all known medical knowledge of the time. Ibn al-Haytham, known in Latin as Al-Hazan, pioneered the scientific method and made groundbreaking discoveries in optics. His Book of Optics influenced scientists for centuries, including later European thinkers like Roger Bacon and Johannes Kepler. Hospitals in the Islamic world during this period were more advanced than anything in Europe. The Ahmad ibn Tulun Hospital in 9th century Cairo had separate wards for different diseases, a library, and even a psychiatric wing. The founding document of the 13th century Al-Mansuri Hospital stated it would serve everyone, the powerful and the weak, the poor and the rich, without any payment required. Why does this intellectual achievement matter for Islamic civilization's survival? Because it created value that transcended temporary political power. When European crusaders encountered Islamic civilization, they were astonished by its sophistication. They brought back not just goods, but ideas and knowledge that helped spark the European Renaissance. This intellectual tradition created a class of scholars, the ulama, who became guardians of Islamic knowledge and tradition. These scholars could maintain Islamic civilization even when political structures weakened. They ran schools called madrasas that taught religion along with mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and law. The legal framework. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Islam's longevity is the role of Islamic law, called Sharia. In the West, this term often carries negative connotations, but for historians studying Islamic civilization, Sharia represents something remarkable. It created a legal framework that could function across diverse cultures and persist through political upheaval. Sharia isn't a single code of laws like a modern legal system. It's a comprehensive approach to life that covers everything from religious rituals to business contracts to family relationships. It developed gradually over the first few centuries of Islam, drawing on the Quran, the Hadith, sayings and actions of Muhammad, and centuries of scholarly interpretation. What made Sharia so effective for civilization building was its adaptability within a consistent framework. 4 main schools of Islamic jurisprudence developed among Sunni Muslims, each with slightly different methodologies, but recognizing each other as legitimate. This meant Islamic law could adapt to local customs in Morocco, India, Indonesia, and Egypt, while maintaining recognizable Islamic character. The ulama, Islamic scholars and jurists, became the guardians and interpreters of Sharia. They were respected across Islamic lands, regardless of which political authority ruled. A scholar from Córdoba in Spain could debate legal points with a scholar from Samarkand in Central Asia because they shared this common legal tradition. Islamic law provided crucial practical benefits that helped Islam spread and endure. It protected merchants, which encouraged trade. It provided clear rules for inheritance, which gave people confidence in building wealth. It established rights for religious minorities called dhimmis, which allowed Jews and Christians to live under Islamic rule while maintaining their faiths. The Qadi system, with Islamic judges in every major city, meant that people had access to consistent justice based on religious law rather than the arbitrary whims of rulers. This created trust in the system and loyalty to the religious framework that provided it. When political centers collapsed, Sharia continued functioning at the local level. Communities could organize themselves according to Islamic law even without strong central government. This resilience helped Islamic civilization survive periods of political chaos that would have destroyed systems dependent solely on state power. The madrasa system, which spread throughout the Islamic world starting in the 11th century, created standardized Islamic education. Students could study in Damascus, then continue their education in Cairo or Baghdad because the curriculum and methods were similar. This educational network helped maintain Islamic civilization's intellectual continuity. The Sufi connection. While political power and intellectual achievement are impressive, they don't fully explain how Islam spread to become a truly global religion. For that, we need to understand Sufism and the role of Muslim mystics and missionaries. Sufism is the mystical dimension of Islam. Sufi practitioners seek direct personal experience of divine presence through practices like meditation, music, poetry, and dancing. While Sufi beliefs and practices varied widely, they shared an emphasis on inner spiritual development and devotion to God. Sufi orders called tariqas developed starting in the 9th century. These were organized groups led by masters who taught disciples. Some of the most influential included the Qadiriyya, Naqshbandiya. These groups established lodges and gathering places throughout the Islamic world and beyond. Here's what made Sufism so important for Islam's spread and survival. Sufi teachers were often willing to incorporate local customs and practices into Islamic framework. When Sufi missionaries reached new areas, they didn't demand that people abandon all their cultural traditions. They found ways to present Islam that resonated with local spiritual sensibilities. In India, Sufi saints like Moinuddin Chishti welcomed people from all backgrounds, including those from lower castes, who found Islam's message of equality appealing. The Chishti order became instrumental in spreading Islam throughout South Asia. Their shrines became pilgrimage sites that attracted Muslims and non-Muslims alike. In Southeast Asia, particularly in Indonesia and Malaysia, Sufi traders and teachers played crucial roles in converting local populations. They presented Islam in ways that connected with existing spiritual traditions, making conversion feel less like abandoning old ways and more like fulfilling them. In West Africa, Sufi orders like the Qadiriyya and Tijaniyya spread Islam among diverse African peoples. Sufi leaders often became political as well as spiritual figures, helping establish Islamic states and educational systems. Timbuktu, once a center of Islamic scholarship in West Africa, owed much of its development to Sufi networks. Sufism provided Islam with emotional and spiritual depth that complemented its legal and intellectual aspects. Sufi poetry by masters like Rumi became beloved across cultures. Sufi music and devotional practices gave people ways to express religious feeling beyond just following rules and rituals. The lodge system created social networks that helped Muslims in different regions feel connected to a broader Islamic community. A Sufi disciple could travel from Morocco to India and find lodges where he would be welcomed, given shelter, and connected with other practitioners. These networks paralleled and reinforced the merchant networks we discussed earlier. Importantly, Sufism helped Islam survive periods of political oppression or decline. Even when Islamic states weakened, Sufi lodges continued functioning, providing community, education, and spiritual guidance. This grassroots religious vitality kept Islam alive in communities when official institutions failed. The flexibility factor. One pattern becomes clear when you study Islamic history across different regions. Islam has shown remarkable ability to adapt to diverse cultural contexts while maintaining core identity. This flexibility has been crucial for its 14th century survival. Look at how differently Islam manifested in various regions. In Persia, which had ancient sophisticated culture, Islam absorbed Persian artistic traditions, architectural styles, and literary forms. Persian became a major language of Islamic scholarship and poetry, second only to Arabic. The Persian New Year, Nowruz, continued to be celebrated in Islamic Persia. In Southeast Asia, Islam adapted to maritime cultures. Indonesian Islam incorporated elements from earlier Hindu and Buddhist traditions. Wayang shadow puppet theater, originally used for Hindu epics, was adapted to tell Islamic stories. Islamic architecture in Indonesia looks distinctly different from Middle Eastern mosques, incorporating local building styles and materials. In West Africa, Islam coexisted with traditional African customs. Many African Muslims maintained practices related to ancestry and local spirits alongside Islamic prayer and fasting. Architectural styles of West African mosques, like the Great Mosque of Djenné in Mali, look nothing like Arabian or Persian mosques, but are distinctly African in design. This adaptability wasn't weakness or corruption of pure Islam. It was strategic genius, whether intentional or not. By allowing local cultural expression within Islamic framework, the religion could spread without destroying indigenous cultures entirely. People could become Muslim while still feeling connected to their ancestral traditions. The Ottoman Empire, which lasted over 600 years, exemplified this flexibility. It ruled over Arabs, Turks, Greeks, Armenians, Kurds, and dozens of other ethnic groups. It created a system called the millet system that gave religious and ethnic communities autonomy in managing their own affairs. This pragmatic tolerance helped the empire endure for centuries. Islamic law itself showed flexibility through its different schools of jurisprudence. The Hanafi school, dominant in the Ottoman Empire and South Asia, was generally more flexible in its interpretations. The Maliki school, prevalent in North and West Africa, emphasized local custom. This legal diversity allowed Islamic law to function effectively in vastly different societies. The concept of ijtihad, independent reasoning by qualified scholars to interpret Islamic law for new situations, provided built-in mechanism for adaptation. While some periods of Islamic history saw more emphasis on following established precedent, ijtihad allowed Islamic civilization to respond to changing circumstances. This doesn't mean Islam had no constants. The 5 pillars of Islam remained universal. The Quran's text was preserved identically across all regions. Daily prayers followed the same basic structure everywhere, but within this consistent framework, enormous diversity flourished. The role of literacy and education. Islamic civilization placed extraordinary emphasis on literacy and education from its very beginning. This focus on learning has been fundamental to Islam's survival and transmission across generations. The Quran itself begins with the command, "Read." Muslims believe these were the first words revealed to Muhammad. The emphasis on reading and learning became embedded in Islamic culture from the start. Every Muslim was expected to be able to read at least portions of the Quran in Arabic, creating baseline literacy requirements that many other societies lacked. Mosques served not just as prayer spaces, but as educational centers. Children learned to read using Quran verses. Basic Islamic education became widespread throughout the Islamic world, creating literacy rates that were remarkable for pre-modern societies. This mass literacy had practical benefits for commerce, administration, and social organization. The madrasa system, which developed starting in the 11th century, created institutions of higher learning throughout the Islamic world. These weren't just religious schools. They taught Islamic law and theology, yes, but also mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, and philosophy. The most famous madrasas, like Al-Azhar in Cairo and Nizamiya in Baghdad, attracted students from across the Islamic world. Paper-making technology, which Muslims learned from China, spread throughout Islamic lands by the 8th century. This made books much cheaper than parchment or papyrus. Islamic civilization became a civilization of books centuries before the printing press reached Europe. Libraries flourished in major cities. Scholars could make living writing and copying books. The emphasis on education created a scholarly class, the ulama, who were respected regardless of ethnic origin or social background. A scholar's son might become a merchant, but a merchant's son could become a scholar through education. This intellectual meritocracy allowed talent to rise regardless of family connections. Bimaristans, Islamic hospitals, included libraries and provided medical education. Students learned medicine through both theoretical study and practical training with patients. This systematic medical education helped preserve and advance medical knowledge across generations. The translation movement during the Abbasid period created an intellectual common ground. Works translated into Arabic could be read by scholars from Spain to Central Asia. This shared corpus of knowledge unified Islamic intellectual culture even when political unity fragmented. Women's education also played a role, though it varied by region and time period. Many early Islamic scholars were taught by their mothers. Aisha, Muhammad's wife, was recognized as a major transmitter of hadith and Islamic knowledge. While women's educational opportunities were often limited compared to men, Islamic societies generally valued educated women more than contemporary non-Muslim societies did. The health and longevity factor. Historians now point out that Islamic civilization's focus on health and cleanliness may have supported its long-term stability. Studies comparing life expectancy suggest that people in medieval Islamic lands often lived beyond 35 years, which was higher than estimates for medieval England and far better than many earlier societies. Cleanliness was built into daily life. Ritual ablutions before prayers required frequent washing of hands, face, and feet, which helped reduce disease spread. Muhammad's teachings also encouraged regular bathing, clean clothing, and oral hygiene, shaping habits that supported public health. Urban infrastructure played a major role. Islamic cities built aqueducts, wells, qanats, public fountains, and bathhouses, giving people regular access to clean water. City planning separated residential areas from certain commercial activities, lowering exposure to waste and contamination. Medical institutions were another strength. Islamic hospitals had trained physicians, organized wards, and systems to prevent cross-infection. They treated patients regardless of wealth, giving broader access to care. Dietary laws reduced certain health risks by prohibiting pork, which eliminated a source of parasitic infections, and requiring healthy animals for slaughter. Rules about consuming fresh meat limit foodborne illnesses. The broader emphasis on moderation, along with fasting during Ramadan, also encouraged balanced eating habits. The merchant class. We've touched on trade already, but the specific role of Muslim merchants deserves deeper examination. These traders weren't just business people. They were ambassadors of Islamic civilization who spread the faith through personal example and commercial relationships. Muslim merchants established diaspora communities in ports and trading cities throughout Africa and Asia. These communities built mosques, established Islamic schools, and created Islamic legal and social infrastructure. Non-Muslims trading with these communities encountered Islam firsthand in practical, everyday contexts. Conversion often happened through these commercial contacts. A local trader might convert to facilitate business relationships with Muslim merchants. Islamic law provided frameworks for commercial contracts that gave trading partners confidence. The shared religious identity created trust that made long-distance trade less risky. Intermarriage between Muslim traders and local women was common and accepted in Islamic law. Children of these marriages were typically raised as Muslims, spreading the faith through family networks. This method of expansion was peaceful and organic, creating committed Muslims rather than forced converts. The Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, required of all Muslims who are able, created another network for spreading Islamic civilization. Pilgrims from across the Islamic world converged on Mecca annually. They shared knowledge, established business relationships, and returned home with renewed commitment and new ideas. Merchant support for Islamic institutions helped them survive political instability. Wealthy merchants funded mosque construction, supported scholars, and endowed schools and hospitals. This private financing meant Islamic institutions didn't depend entirely on state support and could weather political storms. The Islamic prohibition on interest posed some challenges for financing trade, but Muslim legal scholars developed creative solutions. Mudaraba partnerships, where one party provided capital and another provided labor, created profit-sharing arrangements that complied with Islamic law while facilitating business. These innovations helped Islamic commerce thrive. The fragmentation challenge. Islamic civilization faced major threats, especially political fragmentation, yet it continued to survive. The first division appeared after Muhammad's death in 632 CE, when disagreement over succession created the Sunni-Shia split. Later, the Umayyad Caliphate struggled with rebellions until it was overthrown by the Abbasids in 750, leading to competing centers of power, including the Umayyad state in Spain. Even the Abbasids gradually lost real authority. By the 10th century, many regions were controlled by local dynasties, and the Fatimid Caliphate challenged Abbasid legitimacy from North Africa. The Mongol invasions in the 13th century brought even greater destruction, including the 1258 sack of Baghdad. But Islamic culture continued through the Mamluks and later the rise of the Ottomans. The Crusades and later European colonial rule caused long periods of instability and loss of political control. Yet Islamic identity and practice survived. The main reason was that Islamic civilization rested on a shared religious community rather than a single political system. Common beliefs, legal traditions, and cultural practices held the civilization together even when its political institutions collapsed. The Renewal movements. Throughout its 14th century history, Islamic civilization has experienced periodic renewal movements that revitalized the faith and adapted it to new circumstances. These movements have been crucial for Islam's continued relevance and survival. The concept of Tajdeed renewal is embedded in Islamic tradition. A hadith suggests that God would send someone to renew the religion for the Muslim community at the beginning of each century. Whether or not you believe this literally, renewal movements have indeed appeared regularly in Islamic history. The Abbasid revolution itself was a kind of renewal movement. It promised to return Islamic governance to more egalitarian principles and overthrew what many saw as the corrupt Umayyad dynasty. The early Abbasid period saw tremendous intellectual and cultural flowering. Sufi movements provided periodic spiritual renewal. When Islam risked becoming overly focused on external ritual and legal compliance, Sufi masters emphasized inner spiritual development and direct experience of divine presence. This prevented Islam from becoming merely a system of rules without spiritual vitality. Reform movements emerged when Muslim societies faced challenges or decline. The Almohad movement in 12th century North Africa and Spain called for return to pure monotheism and reform of corrupt practices. The movement united diverse tribes and created a powerful dynasty that produced architectural marvels like the Giralda in Seville. The 18th and 19th centuries saw multiple revival movements responding to colonialism and perceived decline. The Wahhabi movement in Arabia called for return to early Islamic principles. The Deobandi movement in India sought to preserve Islamic education and identity under British colonial rule. While controversial, these movements showed Islam's ability to respond to changing circumstances. Modernist movements in the 20th century sought to reinterpret Islamic principles for the modern world. Figures like Muhammad Abduh in Egypt argued that Islam was compatible with reason and science. They sought to demonstrate that Muslims could embrace modernity without abandoning their faith. These renewal movements weren't always successful or unproblematic. Some led to sectarianism and conflict, but they demonstrated that Islam wasn't static. It could evolve, adapt, and renew itself in response to challenges and opportunities. The modern era. Today, Islam is the world's second-largest religion, with about 1.8 billion followers, and it is projected to become the largest by the end of this century. Colonial rule challenged Islamic civilization, as European powers conquered most Muslim lands, weakened traditional institutions, replaced madrasas with Western schools, and introduced European-style legal codes. Despite this, Islam remained influential. Independence movements often drew on Islamic identity to unite populations, and leaders like Jinnah and Sukarno used Islam as a cultural and political resource. Secular modernization efforts in countries such as Turkey, Egypt, and Iran had mixed results and sometimes generated backlash, while the 1979 Iranian Revolution demonstrated Islam's continuing political relevance. Migration has spread Islam to regions with no historic Muslim presence, creating communities in Europe, North America, and elsewhere. Technology has further transformed Islamic practice, allowing global access to scholarship, lectures, and community connections online. At the same time, Muslims face challenges, including extremism, Islamophobia, debates over modern interpretations. Muslim-majority countries show diversity in governance, development, and social conditions. Some successfully combine Islamic identity with democracy and economic growth, while others struggle with authoritarianism and conflict. This diversity highlights Islam's adaptability and the varied circumstances of its followers worldwide. Islamic civilization endured for 14 centuries because it built interconnected systems that supported each other, political structures that unified religious and temporal authority, trade networks that linked continents, legal frameworks that maintained order, educational institutions that promoted literacy, and intellectual traditions that advanced human knowledge. Its spiritual depth, cultural adaptability, emphasis on health and cleanliness, and periodic reform movements kept it resilient even during fragmentation and external pressure. Together, these elements created a civilization with a strong core identity and the ability to renew itself across generations. What do you think was the single most important factor in Islam's longevity? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.